Thank you very much, Mia, for this wonderful and very flattering introduction, and for organizing the conference. Thank you to all the rest of the organizers here as well. Is this mic working well? Is it okay? As you've all heard, I come here from the university, but I used to work at the Ictr before relocating to the ivory tower of academia. But still, I never really left the tribunal as it became the focus of my research. And since my research was empirical, based on interviews, I kept visiting and physically returning to the tribunal. So I thank the conference organizers for the opportunity to share my research findings with some of my former colleagues from the tribunal and fellow academics. I look forward to engage in a fruitful conversation after this presentation. And you'll see, as Phil said, there's so much to say on so many issues, so I'll skip parts and leave it for the Q&A sections. Well, my research that I will speak about here examines the contribution of the Ictr to reconciliation. Not a new topic. Both speakers have discussed this topic, and I thank you, Etienne, for some of these very good observations, which I will follow up on. So as we heard from Etienne, the promotion of national reconciliation was one of the stated goals of the Ictr, yet there is a growing consensus that the Ictr has failed to achieve this goal. And this claim, as we heard, is based on several arguments. Of course, one main thing I'll come back to later is the difficulty of defining national reconciliation, but I'll get back to that later. And I think conventional arguments about the lack of a reconciliation impact of the Ictr touch upon the issue of the restorative effect of the Ictr, and how the Ictr lacked a reparation plan, lacked a rehabilitation plan vis-a-vis the victims, did not incorporate the victims in its work as active participants. Others, Professor Drumble is here, have argued that more broadly, to expect criminal trials to promote reconciliation is probably too much. They are insufficient in the fact that their records do not relate to the broad society. They pick and choose the cases, as we heard. And so they can't promote this broad societal reckoning with the past, which could be needed for reconciliation. There are also people who go an extra step and say that the Ictr may have undermined reconciliation. So not only was it insufficient to reconciliation, or not only did it not contribute towards reconciliation, but it actually undermined reconciliation. And some of those who argue that would base their claim on the fact that the Ictr may have compromised the security of certain victims. It may have traumatized the witnesses who were involved in the process. Some of the tribunal's verdicts caused a lot of resentment in Rwanda. So again, it's more divisive than reconciliatory. However, there is very little empirical evidence supporting this claim that the Ictr undermined reconciliation. And in addition, I would claim that this claim that the Ictr undermined reconciliation is misguided for 3 reasons that I will point out. First of all, it ignores actual cases in which victims did feel empowered by the Ictr's process. And as a former employee of the Ictr, I had the opportunity to engage in dialogues with such victims and other witnesses that did feel a restorative effect through the testimony they gave and other products of the Ictr. And also other Rwandans that were not directly involved in the process do consider the tribunal to have had certain restorative effects, for example, through the truth-finding function or the delegitimization of former radical leaders or through the development of human rights norms. Again, there's no empirical evidence supporting one side or another. I just want to point out that the claim about the Ictr undermining reconciliation fails to consider some of these positive examples. And secondly, the critique against the Ictr fails to consider the important mediating role that the Rwandan government had. In other words, the critique blames the Ictr for the alleged failure to promote reconciliation without attributing any responsibility for this failure to the Rwandan government, which, for various political reasons, has for years been engaged in delegitimizing the Ictr in the eyes of the Rwandan population. We see this in other cases of international courts, and it might be inherent to their function. There will always be a resistance by the national political elite for various reasons, and it's different reasons in each case. Some of them recur, some of them differ. But this international intervention or this distanced institution raises certain antagonisms within the political elites, who will then in turn try to delegitimize the tribunal internally through their rhetoric, speeches, and media. So we can expect this to happen, and I think one criticizing the ICTR about not contributing or about undermining reconciliation should also look at the role of the Rwandan government in enabling this kind of impact. And the third misguidance, or the third reason that I say that the critique against the ICTR may be misguided, and I will go into further detail about this one, is that the claim overlooks a more indirect but nonetheless influential way in which the ICTR may affect reconciliation in Rwanda. And this indirect way is through the encouragement of the ICTR of certain legal developments in Rwanda. And Phil mentioned this notion of tangible impacts. And over the years, I've been looking at various international criminal tribunals and trying to look at where they had tangible impacts in the affected communities or countries. And basically, I was able to point out that one of the areas in which you can see a tangible impact is on the legal system of the affected country. So in other words, when an international court enters into a certain domain, you can expect the reaction of the relevant domestic justice system, and a dialogue occurs between that domestic system and the international justice system. And in the course of this dialogue, a lot of changes, reforms, and practices are being developed on the national level as a result of this interaction. And I think with regards to the ICTR, we have seen a lot of legal changes in Rwanda that were a direct result of this conversation between the Rwandan justice system and the international justice system, being in the ICTR. And some of these legal developments, I won't go into length into how they were evolved, but I can refer you to writing on the issue, and we can talk about it in the Q&A session. But I'll just give the bottom line of the developments that my research has identified that the ICTR has encouraged in Rwanda. And these include legal institutional reforms, such as the improvement of detention facilities, courtroom facilities, the strengthening of a national witness protection system that you've recently written on, Phil. And they also include normative reforms, such as the upgrading of due process norms in Rwanda, or the abolition of the death penalty in Rwanda, and the exclusion of life sentence in isolation. More than that, the ICTR encouraged new judicial processes in Rwanda. And we just heard from Etienne about the alleged allegations about war crimes committed by RPF members. And one of the judicial processes in Rwanda, which the ICTR encouraged, is the holding of a first ever trial of RPF officers for war crimes committed against Hutu victims. And of course, we also heard about, and we'll hear some more about, the referral of genocide cases by the tribunal to Rwanda and the handling of the national justice system of these proceedings. So all these legal developments in Rwanda were encouraged by the ICTR, and predominantly by this procedure that the ICTR has of referring cases to the national courts, which is enshrined in the Rule 11 bis of the rules of the ICTR. And indeed, these developments were enabled because of Rwanda's policy and Rwanda's attempt to meet the ICTR's legal requirements for case referrals. And I'm not suggesting that it's only the ICTR's referral procedure alone that encouraged these domestic effects. Of course, effects of this nature will never be monocausal, but I still believe that the ICTR had a major role in encouraging these effects. And we could talk more about the other factors that encourage these effects, including domestic dynamics later in the Q&A session. So I see I have very few time left. So in the interest of time, I want to take you back to my main hypothesis. And that was that the ICTR encouraged legal developments in Rwanda, which in turn may have influenced national reconciliation. In other words, by affecting the Rwandan justice system, the ICTR may have indirectly affected reconciliation. And because of this, and again, this is an hypothesis, and I argue that this warrants some need to study how the domestic legal impacts of the ICTR in turn affect reconciliation. and perhaps through these studies develop a richer and more nuanced understanding of the ICTR's impact on national reconciliation in Rwanda. So even if this impact is indirect, it could still be significant in terms of the number of people it can affect and the length of time it can continue to affect the affected population. And by the way, this approach to assessing the relationship between an international criminal tribunal and a national system is applicable to all international criminal tribunals, not just to the ICTR. So in other words, looking at the domestic legal effects of international courts and then in turn trying to trace the impact of those legal effects on national reconciliation could be a fruitful endeavor. In my research, I highlighted a variety of legal impacts of the ICTR on Rwanda, and then ideally to look at the impact of these national legal developments on reconciliation, I would take each one of the ones I identified and assess their impact on reconciliation. But due to the shortage of time and shortage of resources, I focused on two of them. So I focused on two legal impacts of the ICTR in Rwanda, being the death penalty abolition and this trial that I mentioned, the war crimes trial against RPF members. I will call it the Kapgai trial because it involved an incident in the outskirts of the town of Kapgai in South Rwanda. I took two of these legal impacts of the ICTR and tried to identify their impact on national reconciliation. Now, I don't have time to go into the findings, and I will just, in a nutshell, say that the findings were mixed. Whereas with the death penalty case, I found that there was quite a positive impact on reconciliation to the abolition. With the Kapgai trial, I found more of a mixed impact, either no impact or a little bit of a negative impact on reconciliation, and I will go into this if you ask me specifically in the Q&A section. But I want to skip now to my conclusions. How much time do I have?
1 minute.
1 more minute. I have a bunch of quotes here on the death penalty abolition, but we'll keep that for later. And maybe before I conclude, I'll just stress that with the Kapgai trial, where I found that there was a little bit of a mixed or negative reconciliation impact, actually this case demonstrated some of what was said below, because when the ICTR prosecutor here with us today, Honorable Jallo, had deferred the case to Rwanda, he publicly announced that he did so because he believed that it would encourage national reconciliation in Rwanda for Rwanda to do the case. Now, this could be the right guidance, and it could be that he was genuinely believing that. And it could have actually been the case. I think there was lots of potential for this to happen. I think there's a lot of potential for a country to handle its own cases and for this to impact on reconciliation more than on international criminal tribunals hope to influence reconciliation. However, the ICTR never actually followed up and examined whether this national trial was eventually conducive to national reconciliation. And of course, justice in itself is very important for reconciliation, and I'm wrapping up. However, justice may affect reconciliation in a variety of ways. When justice is delivered at the international level, it may need to be translated into local terms or manifested in national developments before it can meaningfully affect national reconciliation. But even then, when certain national judicial developments are motivated exclusively by the desire to satisfy an international criminal tribunal, they may not be fully embedded in the domestic sphere. And again, this doesn't come out in every example. When I researched the death penalty abolition, that impact of the ICTR has been very much embedded in the Rwandan system and very much seen by Rwandans as a Rwandan development, and very much seen as well as conducive to reconciliation. So this is very mixed, and this is an ongoing research as well. So I just want to say that for an ICT, if an international criminal tribunal sees itself as mandated to contribute to a national reconciliation, it may want to follow up some of the ripple effects of its own impacts on the national justice system. And researchers may want to also look into these impacts before they assess one way or another the reconciliation impact and the possibilities of affecting reconciliation that an international criminal tribunal actually entails. And I will finish with that, and I look forward to questions and answers on the topic. Thank you very much.